Great. So thank you very much, Ken, for your introduction. And just to repeat what Ken said, it's lovely to see so many of you joining us today. So just by way of an introduction, my name is Louisa Withers, and having worked in the pay and employment research field since 2004, you could probably call me a highly experienced reward analyst and project manager. I'm also one of the founders of Income Data Research, IDR, and I was formerly employed as a senior project manager at Income Data Services, which some of you may have had dealings with at the time. A lot of people knew it as the green one, used to produce something called the pay report. In terms of my experience, I've delivered a wide range of projects, research and consultancy projects covering total reward, job evaluation, pay and grading reviews, equal pay audits, among a wide range of other specialist pay and reward topics. Today, I'm going to share some insights from my experience analysing the gender pay gap, which hopefully you'll find useful in your own work. If anything, at least should give you some food for thought, and hopefully we'll have some discussion at the end. Some of you might feel it can be a bit of a daunting area, so hopefully I can give you some sort of tips from our experience of looking at it, which you can take forward. If after the presentation you'd like any further support from us, then we do have a range of experience in this area, which covers analysis, reporting, as well as sort of bespoke consultancy and advice. Firms have been legally required to publish their gender pay gap figures since, well, the first reports came out in 2018. And it could be said to a certain extent that the gender pay gap reporting regulations 2017 are a success. They've certainly put the issue of gender pay gap on the HR agenda, and monitoring by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is the body responsible for enforcing the reporting regulations, suggests that virtually all of those that are required to publish figures in 2022 actually did so. So that's the kind of the positive. However, on the other side, the pay gap reporting regs only require employers to produce just 4 statistics. So the percentage of men and women in each pay quarter, median average pay gap, percentage of men and women receiving a bonus, and the median and average pay gap figures. And in reality, those figures actually tell us nothing about discrimination and gender equality. And even if an organisation's gap is large at face value, it's not necessarily a measure of direct or indirect employer discrimination. While all employers can choose to publish a supporting narrative, and in fact they are encouraged to do so by the government and other bodies, only around 65% of those that provided and published their figures in 2022 actually included any extra information about the causes and reasons for their pay gaps. And looking at some of those narratives in more detail, they varied significantly in respect of actually explaining the causes of their gender pay gaps and describing their efforts to try to tackle those. And some organisations' narratives were really quite sparse with very little information indeed. Our view is that the key issue is that the statistics reported on their own are really not enough for you to understand your pay gaps. The narratives are absolutely critical and key to understanding and explaining the reasons for your pay gaps. Without understanding why they're arising and where they're arising, employers really have no chance or very little chance of tackling them and trying to kind of narrow their organisation's pay gaps and indeed the economy-wide gender pay gap. In our suggestion would be that employers should undertake further detailed analysis to really understand their pay gaps. Those key statistics are not sufficient, and we would recommend that would entail further detailed analysis, or in actual fact, a full equal pay audit. As a minimum, we would recommend that you calculate pay gaps between men and women by grade, by department, by working hours, by which I mean sort of full and part-time, by length of service, and by age. Obviously, before you embark, somebody's saying there's a blank slide. Is there an issue? No. We can send the slides afterwards if anybody's having issues not seeing the slides. Sorry. So before you start this analysis, the first thing you'll need to do is to determine the scope, and this is likely to be data driven. So you need to start, the starting point will be to examine your workforce and payroll data to see the data that you have, and that you would need to do those analyses that we indicated just previously. So how much data do you require? Do you already have it? Is it accurate? Is it up to date? Is it easily accessible? And once you start looking at your management information, you might find that you don't have the correct grades allocated to all staff. You are missing some information on their start dates, missing information on their dates of birth, and that's obviously going to cause a little bit of a challenge to you. So you'd need to do that kind of audit of information before you commence, and you can decide then on the scope of what it is you're able to analyse. If you are missing information, or you realise that there is some information that needs updating, you'll need to develop a plan for tackling that. But you don't have to do all of the analysis at once. The EHRC also states that in their guidance, and there might be valid reasons why it's not possible for you to look at all staff broken down by grade, department, length of service, etc. So you might be able to tackle the challenge and the analysis in pieces. Start with a particular directorate, for example, or maybe just look at grade and not the other criteria. It will very much be data driven. Sample sizes will also be a consideration here. And we note that the Office for National Statistics recommends that the minimum size sample should be between 5 and 20 employees if you're doing internal reporting purposes only. So obviously if it's internal reporting, your primary concern will be not disclosing information about individual employees. However, if you plan to take that analysis and publish it more widely, for example, through the gender pay gap reporting service, the minimum figure the ONS recommend is a sample size of 50 employees, and that's to both preserve anonymity for individuals and also ensure statistical robustness. So some of those factors you'll need to take into account determining the actual scope of your analysis or equal pay audit if you can do the full extent of analysis. The next task will be to identify which employees are doing equal work. And there are three kinds of equal work. We have like work, work rated as equivalent, and work of equal value. So like work is the same or broadly similar work. It involves similar tasks, similar knowledge and skills, and any differences in the work are really not of any practical or significant importance. Work rated as equivalent is where it has been rated as equivalent under a job evaluation scheme, and the two roles are being considered of equal value in terms of how demanding their roles are. Work of equal value is not similar and it hasn't been rated as equivalent, but it is of equal value in terms of the demands of effort, skills and decision making. So you'll need to have a look at the roles in your organisation and determine where there are employees doing equal work. This will be a lot easier for employers that already have grading structures based on job evaluation. So pretty much all of the public sector and a large number of large employers in the private sector. But it is still possible where you don't have job evaluation in your organisation, but that will involve some form of assessment method. So you'll need to kind of weigh up and analyse and assess where jobs might be considered of equal value. So one approach here might be to adopt a kind of job classification approach where you look at the grades and determine the grade definitions. So I don't know, analyst, senior analyst, etc. And then you would compare a selection of representative benchmark jobs in each of those definitions with the other roles so that you can kind of work out where they fit together. It's like an advanced job ranking system. So you're not just simply putting the roles in hierarchical order, you're actually considering for each role the skills, efforts and responsibility for one role against another. So it's not full job evaluation. It doesn't go the full hog because it doesn't quantify the differences, but it does start to enable you to classify and categorize works and establish where roles are potentially doing equal work. So that's the next kind of challenge you've got if you don't have job evaluation. Once you've actually completed these steps, you can go ahead and calculate your gaps, and you want to try and identify the key patterns and trends. So how large are the gaps? In what areas of the organisation are they occurring? Is it a departmental thing? Is it a particular area of the pay distribution? Are you having larger gaps at the senior end versus the more junior end? More specifically, you need to get behind the numbers to really understand what is causing those pay gaps. The precise causes of your pay gaps will obviously vary, but there are some contributory factors that are relevant to most organisations. So one of the key factors affecting the gender pay gap is workforce composition. And the key part here is occupational segregation. So this is where we find men and women concentrated in different jobs, and women, sorry, tend to be found more commonly in the less well paid positions compared to those dominated by men. And this is one of the major contributors to the gap in earnings between men and women. There are two types of occupational segregation. So we have vertical segregation, whereby you find men in more of the senior positions. So this is where people might talk about something like a glass ceiling, where you find fewer women in senior management and board positions, which will have an overall impact on the gender pay gap. But we also have horizontal segregation, and this is where you'll find men and women concentrated in different types of work and different jobs. And sometimes you may have heard people talk about the 5 C's of women's work, and they are the fact that you find women are concentrated in clerical, cashiering, catering, cleaning, and care work. And by contrast, men are more concentrated in sort of technical and engineering roles, and that also has an impact on the gender pay gap. Another issue that employers find that has contributed to their pay gaps, not just between men and women, but for other protected characteristic groups as well, are their attraction and recruitment practices. This is linked to the previous point, and it also perpetuates it. So what I'm saying here is that your attraction recruitment practices may be contributing to the patterns that you've previously identified. So you're not attracting women to senior positions, you're not attracting them to apply for those roles. And there might be something there with the job descriptions, the job adverts that you're putting out, and the job descriptions and person specifications are not appealing to all demographics. Perhaps they're not using gender neutral language. Perhaps you're not putting anything in the role about your policy in relation to flexible and part-time working. That sometimes puts off women from applying for some of those senior positions. Also, recruitment, you need to ask what's been going on with your recruitment stage. How does it take place? Who is assessing the candidates? Is there bias there where managers are only selecting men if they're male managers? You know, what's the kind of process for checking that men and women and other protected groups have been considered equally and fairly for the roles when it comes to recruitment? And you may find here, when you look in more detail, that there's actually a disconnect between the policy around recruitment and actually what happens in practice. So that again can be one of the causes of the gender pay gap. Starting salaries can be a key issue. What's your policy on starting pay? If these are open to negotiation, it could well be contributing to the gap between men and women, since we know that the research indicates that men are far more likely to negotiate their starting pay. There's a real reluctance among women to sort of negotiate on pay rates. So if there's a policy that allows negotiation, that could be playing a role. A key issue as well that employers face that affects their pay gaps are barriers that they have to progression and promotion. You might have the fact that if it's an internal employee moving into a new role through promotion, that they're only able to start on say the maximum of the pay range. But if it was an external recruit, they might be able to be paid above that level. So there's how does the promotion policy work? Does it vary for internal and external staff? What about progression? How frequently or opportunities come up? Are women putting themselves forward for promotion and progression? What are the barriers? Why not? Line managers need to be having conversations there. Are there any patterns around part-time workers or those that work flexible hours when it comes to promotion and progression, you'll need to do some analysis to kind of uncover those patterns and trends there, because I think you'll find some causes and drivers there. And also, what are the reasons for slower progression? You tend to find pay gaps widen with age for women, and it does tend to be linked to the fact that they take career and maternity breaks. So looking at those gaps by length of service and age, so both those criteria, can help you explore the impact of career breaks and maternity leave on the gender pay gap. Often pay gaps could be relatively small up to around age 30, and then it starts to widen beyond that. And then women are sometimes affected by the cumulative effect of taking those maternity breaks, and then thereafter, upon their return, working part-time and receiving slower progression and fewer promotion opportunities. So these factors don't operate in isolation. They do interrelate. Another consideration might be the impact of other payments. So the official regulations ask you to calculate gender pay gap on ordinary pay, and this is defined as gross regular pay before any deductions for tax or NI after salary sacrifice. For most employees, this is mainly basic pay, but it can include some shift pay and fixed allowances. So while the impact is likely to be small here, it could be having an impact on the gender pay gap figures. So it might be worth having a look in more detail about what is the pattern based on ordinary pay, and what do the gaps look like when we strip it out and base it on base pay only, and see what patterns emerge there. You might see different trends appearing at different levels in different departments and different areas of the business. So there's some of the kind of common issues and common causes that employers realise when they look in more detail at their gender pay gap and other pay gaps. So the next question is really, what can you do in the short or longer term to rectify some of these issues to help narrow or even eliminate them? So since we already know that occupational segregation plays a key role in the gender pay gap, you could take steps involving reviewing your recruitment practices and policies. So a key and obvious one is to take steps to actively attract women to senior and managerial positions, and likewise and simultaneously try to attract men to a broader mix of positions. And this is in respect of both internal internal recruits and external changes. But be careful, you don't want to just simply play a numbers game. So you want to affect real change, and you don't want to just move the median or average man relative to the median or average woman. So it's not just a numbers game, because that's not going to give you long-term improvement in this area. It might give you, a quick win for 1 year, because the headline statistic, median man's pay versus median woman's pay, has changed significantly, but it's not going to give you any long-term real change. I would recommend that you undertake a review of your job advert descriptions, as I briefly mentioned before, making sure that you're using that gender neutral language and making sure that adverts are reaching all demographics. So there's more analysis and more monitoring to be done here. Who's applying for your roles? What analysis are you doing on that? What data is collected? When it comes to interviewing, evaluating candidates comparatively, not just individually, so having a kind of a panel of candidates, and if you can, hire in batches if at all possible. That's helpful. Not always possible, granted, but it is useful if you can. You should certainly make sure that you run structured interviews, so each candidate is given the same opportunity to provide information on the same areas, and make sure you have a balanced recruitment panel. Make sure you have a mix of people on those panels, and making sure they've undertaken unconscious bias training is also very useful. These steps can really help to improve access and recruitment processes. In addition, we would say open discussions regarding the salary levels can help, and make sure that you have that policy on negotiating starting pay, as well as making sure that that policy is actually followed in practice. And we'd always recommend advertising salary levels, and there has been some kind of government move on this area as well, which I'll come back to in a minute. Other kind of behavioural changes that your organisation might be able to implement to tackle the gaps would be to review the progression practices and policies. And again, it's about encouraging women to go for promotion and ask for progression. Line managers need to play a key role here. They need to discuss with staff members the skills that they need, um, and any factors that are preventing staff from progressing or potentially going for promotion as part of their capacity building. You also should be making sure that you're giving staff access to resources needed for the success in their careers. This might be mentors, it might be sponsors, career sponsors, setting up networking groups, and helping staff follow through sort of planning, setting goals, and obtaining feedback process so that they know how they can develop. Organisations should also look in detail at how progression works in practice, given all of the external factors that have affected the current data that you have, paying particular attention to the rate at which new starters progress and how long it might take for an internal recruit to catch up to an external recruit. Analysis should also take a detailed view of employee salary and promotion progression history to investigate any significant differentials demonstrated for older employees. So you need to make sure that you have those materials and that you're effectively monitoring. Another way you can affect the gender pay gap or help to narrow it would be to promote shared parental leave and flexible working arrangements, and also to try and identify key return to work trends among new parents and see if there's any more support that could be provided there. More broader, there are some structural changes that you could do to tackle the pay gap. These are likely to involve additional resources and costs, so they're not something that you can really undertake lightly. The examples we've given before are things that really are behavioural and could be embedded relatively easily in an HR department, whereas these are kind of more wholesale changes which could take longer and cost more to do. But you could find that your pay structure itself is actually contributing to the gender pay gap. Since we know, and this evidence has also been presented by the ECHRC, that systems based on broad salary bands are high risk in respect of gender equality. Broad salary bands are not as transparent as systems based on pay points or narrower ranges, and often the lack of transparency here serves to kind of hide the outcomes for individuals, so they can't see a route through the band. They don't know how they can progress. There's no clear career path for them, and that all of those things can contribute to the pay gap. Often broad salary ranges are also linked to manager appraisals. So where the outcomes are linked to individual managers, there is wider scope for individual discretion. So things like the relationship to the manager can have an effect there. So you need to look at, are there checks and balances being conducted here? How much leeway is a manager given to produce differential outcomes when it comes to progression increases? Have a look at that, because there could be something in your policy there and the way that those appraisals are being conducted and decisions are being made that is leading to bias influencing the results. So the broader the band, the greater the difference between the minimum and maximum, essentially, and the more pronounced the difficulties might be, and the wider the gaps you're likely to see. So moving to that transparent pay system with smaller pay bands can assist in reducing your gender pay gap. And it can help with more transparency in general, can help with talking about pay, having transparency, giving employees that information about their internal career path, can encourage women and candidates from other minority and protected groups to put themselves forward for promotion or progression. And actually, on the sort of topic of increased pay transparency, last year the government launched a pilot scheme which required all firms to publish salaries on their job adverts. And this, alongside those calls to widen the pay gap reporting regulations, indicate that the issue is going to remain high up on the agenda, and we could see some legislative change coming down the line relatively soon. So hopefully some of what I've said today has been useful. Um, we also think in respect of things that you can do in terms of analysing, understanding, explaining your pay gaps and taking steps to try and tackle those specific causes. There are also some wider changes which help to support women in work more broadly, which could also have a positive impact. So these would include providing a workplace nursery or maybe some form of subsidised childcare. Both are relatively rare benefits. We don't tend to see it a lot, but they are extremely useful to working parents. So that might be something your organisation might want to consider. And another sort of hot topic is introducing a policy that deals with menopause. So this is to help give guidance on addressing any issues that might arise and how managers might make adjustments that might be needed to help support women continue their careers even after the menopause. So I'm going to stop there now. I might have gone on a little bit too long. Apologies for that. So just to recap, today I've basically talked to you about sort of the key actions involved in really trying to deal with gender pay gaps and other pay gaps. So first of all, you need to think about the metrics that describe your gender pay gap. And then you need to look at the pay gaps. How large are they? Do they require action? Where are they occurring? And really, most specifically, what is actually causing them? Then you need to consider what you can do to try to rectify some of those issues to help to narrow or even eliminate those gaps.